Bring in our panel now with decades of experience covering Russia and conflicts all over the world. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, veteran war correspondent Steve Harrigan, Mike Tobin on the ground right now in Lviv, Ukraine, and Aishah Hasnie, she is live in Poland. Steve, why don't you start us off here, because you have seen firsthand the absolute devastation that Russia is bringing upon Ukraine.
I think the thing that worries me most right now is just listening to Vladimir Putin. In recent remarks, he talked about the purification of the Russian people and called people who disagreed with him in Russia insects. When you start calling human beings insects, that's the biggest red flag there is. If you go back to Rwanda, they talked about cockroaches before genocide. And if you go further back to Nazi Germany, they talked about vermin. So Putin is calling his own citizens insects now, and that is worrisome.
Jennifer, let's go to you because you spent time in Moscow as the Moscow bureau chief there. Where do you think Putin is headed with this? What is his endgame in your estimation?
Well, it's really interesting. Steve Harrigan and I were in Moscow at the same time from 1996 to 99, and in that time frame at the end of the Boris Yeltsin era as Putin was just coming to power. I think we don't know how this ends, and I think that's what worries me most as somebody who has followed wars and how they begin and how it's very difficult to end them. Sun Tzu always said that you build a golden bridge for your enemy to retreat so that they can retreat with honor. I'm not seeing that bridge being built. I'm not seeing President Putin wanting that bridge. He's blowing up any bridges that are out there. So what worries me from the time I spent there is that this is a very hardened, vicious man who's willing to, as Steve has described it eloquently, rubble cities going back to the Chechen war times, and it is extremely worrisome.
And Aishah, you are seeing firsthand what it is like for those people to flee a war zone. And what are they telling you?
Well, I have two big concerns for these refugees. One is, of course, the people that have already crossed over. We're talking about more than 3 million people. If you think about that, that's like the biggest cities in America, and I'm concerned about their welfare and their dignity, and if they're getting the resources they need. I'm concerned that they truly believe that they're going to be able to go home. I pray that that is going to happen, but I'm very concerned that that might not happen. And I'm also concerned deeply about the internally displaced. We don't talk about them very much, but those are the millions of people inside Ukraine that haven't been able to flee, that are stuck there right now, that don't have access to food, water, power, and UN aid workers are also meeting challenges, facing challenges even getting to those people because of the constant air raids and the curfew right now in Ukraine. We're having a very hard time reaching those people. It's a very, very dire situation right now. So all around, just deeply concerned about these people.
Mike Tobin in Lviv, out there in the west. Things are not going well for the Russian army in many parts of Ukraine, but that big rally in Moscow today at that stadium, listening to Vladimir Putin, you would never know that was the case. He is a propagandist of the finest degree.
He certainly was. And when you talk about the propaganda and the misinformation, this is the first time I've ever seen a war in which the soldiers were kept so far in the dark. You've seen the dialogue from the prisoners of war and the texts that they have sent back home to their parents, and they didn't know they were invading another country. They thought they were part of an operation. Clearly, they were kept in the dark to prevent leaks, but also it seems that they were kept in the dark to prevent defections. You have towns like Kharkiv and Mykolaiv, which are Russian-speaking and Russian-friendly, and it stands to reason that the Russian soldiers might not have participated had they known what was in their future.
And Jennifer, in this moment, we are still waiting on an official readout from the White House of this phone call or video conference call that President Biden had with the Chinese President Xi Jinping this morning. Perhaps we'll get that when the White House briefing begins a short time from now. But in this moment, there is growing concern over whether China will step in and help Russia in this fight.
Well, this is the most key moment. Is China going to keep this alliance, this marriage of convenience with Russia, or are they going to start looking for a way to separate themselves from Russia? This is a very, very key phone call, perhaps the most important phone call since this invasion has begun. But I want to also mention, we forget that in that 1999 timeframe, the Russian military came actually face to face with the 82nd Airborne U.S. military on the ground in Kosovo. I was sent there as a correspondent for Fox during the Kosovo conflict. And remember, as the Serbs were pulling out after NATO had been involved, they had bombed Kosovo, the Serbs were supposed to be pulling out, and the Russian military hopscotched over the U.S. military and suddenly found themselves in downtown Mitrovica in Kosovo. And I was there and walked up and talked to those Russian troops, and it was very clear that that was a message from Moscow to NATO at that time. And the 82nd Airborne and the U.S. generals, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, had to handle that situation very, very delicately with the 82nd and Russians eyeball to eyeball inside Kosovo.
In terms of whatever readout that we might get from the White House, they're going to have to go a lot further than they normally do if they want to match the Chinese, who provided us with a 3.5-page readout of the video conference call between President Xi and President Biden. So we'll see what level of detail that they go into. But let's go to Steve Harrigan in the meantime, because, Steve, you spent a lot of time in Kyiv. You spent a lot of time in Russia. There is a sense that General Ben Hodges has, and he said this earlier this week, that if the Russian military doesn't consolidate some sort of gains in the next 10 days, they are going to reach the point where they will neither be able to move forward nor backwards. And then the process of demoralization will really proceed in an exponential clip. What's your sense of it, knowing what's going on there in Ukraine, knowing the Russian military? Is Hodges on the right track here?
He might very well be right in this, but I would caution that Putin operates on a different time frame than Western leaders. He doesn't have political opposition. He doesn't have freedom of media. So he's got a real free hand to force the issue, and force the issue with civilian casualties. No one's going to criticize him in Russia publicly for that.
Yeah, and Mike, as night has clearly fallen there, we are working our way into a night. Usually we would be saying goodbye to you for these 2 hours and saying that is a typically peaceful area that you are in. That all changed last night, Mike.
Right. There was the strike at the repair facility, and what we got from the Ukrainian press is that facility was the only one in Ukraine that was able to customize the MiG-29s so they could be used by the Ukrainian Air Force. What we see is every time the discussion starts boiling up about moving the MiGs into Ukraine so the Ukrainians could use them, something gets whacked out here. You get the air bases that get hit, and now you have this facility that got hit. And clearly that's a message. Don't bother moving the MiGs out here. We'll just take them out on the runway.
Aishah, we should point out that you are in a unique position to talk to us about the plight of refugees, because you sit on the board of USA for the UN High Commission on Refugees. And new reports from AP in just the last hour that 6.5 million people inside Ukraine have been displaced. More than 3 million have fled to other countries. This is the biggest displacement of people in Europe in at least the last 80 years. And it's only going to get worse as more people flee these cities that are under increasing bombardment. What do you expect in the next days and weeks ahead?
Well, I can tell you on the ground here, the mood is very uncertain, even among the Polish people. Every Polish person I talk to, feels like we're at the brink of World War III. They're very serious about this threat. They feel like it could, in a matter of moments, cross over into the border, especially as we see things escalating towards the western half of Ukraine. And they're also concerned about the methods that the Russians are using. We keep talking about war crimes, the possibility of war crimes being committed by Russians. I was able to sit down with someone, an Irish national, the other day. He told me that he had just come back from within Ukraine, that he fought with the Ukrainians, and he was telling me that his message to everyone would be, any foreign nationals, don't go in there and fight, because it is nothing like he's ever seen. He's been in different situations in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and he says it's nothing like he's ever seen. He believes that war crimes are being committed. He told me, and Fox has not been able to independently verify this, but he told me that he himself, with his own eyes, witnessed white phosphorus being used. If you know what that is, it is brutal. It is a chemical agent that can go right through human bone. And he said that he has seen that with his own eyes being used on Ukrainians. Again, Fox has not been able to independently verify that, but people are hearing these stories here in Poland. They're extremely concerned, and there is a lot of pressure, especially from humanitarian aid groups, including UNHCR, for world leaders to come up with a resolution as quickly as possible, because they have got to open up these humanitarian corridors and get this aid, blankets, food, water, anything possible to the Ukrainians on the eastern side that are basically lacking basic essentials. So they're struggling. Every time an air raid siren goes off, they're also having to take cover, those UN aid workers having to take cover, having to sit at night when that curfew hits. So they're struggling as well. This needs to turn around pretty quickly.
Jennifer, if I could ask you to respond, or what the Pentagon response was this morning when Vladimir Putin emerged in that stadium in Moscow that, as far as we can tell, seats 80,000. It was filled with Russians waving the Russian flag. He stood in the middle and he delivered a speech. And at one point, there seems to be a technical glitch where he is cut off. I believe we can listen to a little bit of it here.
So happened that the beginning of the operation coincided quite accidentally with the birthday of one of our most outstanding.
And it cut out, and then we are told it returned. Jennifer, what was the Pentagon saying about this?
The Pentagon is not speaking about this, but I can just tell you from my observations that is clearly an interesting and of note technical glitch. Back to what you played a clip of Arnold Schwarzenegger, a very artful clip directly addressing the Russian people. That is because the state television, as Steve knows and everybody knows, is only broadcasting propaganda. So this is a method, a way to try and take an iconic Hollywood figure who is respected by Russian people and speak directly to them and bypass that disinformation architecture. I would like to see, knowing from the time in the 90s who Russians really looked up to in American Hollywood, and Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris, I'd like to see similar messages, and they need to be flooded in through telegrams so that those young Russians know the truth.
Yeah, Steve, back to the military perspective on things here. When you look at how Russia is bogged down and can't seem to make the advance that they intended to make on cities like Kiev, on Kharkiv, that they can't get past Izium and get into the back door of Donbass, how they can't get past the forces in Mykolaiv and onto Odessa, and the fact that they're resorting now to terror tactics to try to pound the Ukrainian people into submission. Is there a sense here, do you have any sense, that if the Ukrainian people and resistance hang on long enough, they just might be able to prevail here?
They certainly might be able to prevail. It is possible, but keep in mind, this is just week 4, and one real danger here could be from the U.S. weapons that are coming in. We've given Ukraine $1 billion in aid in the past week alone. These things like, drones, attack kamikaze drones, and anti-tank missiles. Russia's got to see that as weapons being used to kill Russian soldiers. The real concern is an attack on a U.S. or NATO convoy of weapons, no matter where it is, in Ukraine or over the border. That is a real possibility as these aid shipments ramp up.
Yeah.
Jennifer, Steve, Mike, Aishah, we can hear the laughter of kids in the background. At least I hope that's what that is, as they try to make their way through this horrible time. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.